All right, so today we will be reading the short story for this week. Yesterday, you guys did the vocabulary for the short story, and then today we'll be reading it and answering some questions as we read. So, the title of our story is called The Stranger by Sue Ba. If you saw someone standing by the road on a cold, rainy night, would you stop to help them? One young man does and gets a real surprise. So that's kind of what The Stranger's going to be about. Sounds kind of spooky. So before we read, I want you to connect this to your real life. Imagine you are being out alone somewhere at night. Would you be scared? Would you stop to help a stranger? Or would you think only about getting home? And a couple key to the urban legend. A legend is a story untold over, or a story told over and over until people believe it's true. So a legend might not always be true, but it gets told so many times that people eventually believe it's true. An urban legend is the same thing as a legend, except for it has a modern plot, characters, and setting. So an urban legend is more of a real life legend. And a few vocabulary words for us to look for: the word clung, the word excuse, the word graveyard, and the word headstone. All right, so let's start reading. The focus of this book is about a young man who decides to help a stranger. So let's read and find out what they learn about. So, starting at the top right here, late one Saturday night, a young man was driving home on a deserted stretch of road. He could hear the rain beating against the roof of his car. His headlights cut through the cold mist that clung to the trees on either side of the road. In the flashes of lightning, tree branches seemed like ghostly hands grasping for his car. He could feel the steady drum roll of thunder. What a night to be out. He shivered and wished he were safe at home. Suddenly, as he rounded a curve, his headlights lit up a young woman standing by the side of the road. Her hair and white dress were soaked from the rain. She looked so alone. He couldn't just leave her there. The young man skidded to a stop, then backed up until he could see her face in the window. He leaned over and opened the door. Would you like a ride? She nodded and reached out his hand to help her into the car. He shivered at her touch. Her hand was so cold. She smiled at him and said, Can you take me home? I only live a mile away. Now that she was sitting beside him, he could see how beautiful she was. Dark hair framed her face, and her eyes seemed unusually large and sad. Sure, he said. You must be freezing. He took off his leather jacket and gave it to her. She draped the jacket around her shoulders. I'm always cold, she said, and held her hands up to the heater. Top of this next page. He drove ahead and glanced at her. Why are you walking home? He asked. Did you have a fight with your boyfriend? She didn't answer. Instead, she gazed out the window as they passed a school and a small church. He turned the corner onto a tree-lined street whose cheerful homes seemed warm and safe in the storm. She sat up. There's my house, the two-story one on the corner. He stopped the car next to the walk leading up to the house. He circled around the passenger side and helped her out. Her hand still felt like ice. He walked her to the front door, wondering what it would be like to kiss her. They stood on the front porch for a moment, then suddenly she leaned over and kissed him. Before he could say anything, she stepped into the house and closed the door. He stood staring after her, too astonished to move. Then he turned and walked slowly back to his car. It wasn't until he was behind the wheel that he remembered his leather jacket. She was still wearing it. He looked back at the house, but it was dark, and her parents were probably asleep. He didn't want to wake them up and get her in trouble. Then he smiled. The jacket gave him the perfect excuse to see her again. Top of the next page. The next morning he drove back to the house and rang the bell. An older woman answered the door. She had the same dark hair and sad eyes as the girl. Excuse me, can I talk to your daughter? My daughter? The woman's eyes filled with tears. Laura died a year ago last night in a car accident. It happened at about a mile from here. The young man gasped in disbelief. But, but, but I gave her a ride home last night. I walked her to the door, right here. I saw her go inside the house. The woman shook her head. That can't be. She died a year ago, young man. She's buried in the church graveyard around the corner. Go see for yourself. She's in the third row from the front. The young man walked down the road to the church. He realized it was the same one they had driven past the night before. The small graveyard was behind the church. He found what he was looking for in the third row. A white marble stone was inscribed with the name Laura. The date of death was exactly 1 year ago and 1 day ago. Then he saw something that chilled his blood. There, besides the headstone, was his letter jacket neatly folded on the wet grass. Oh boy. So it sounds like he ended up picking up what he thought was a girl, but it ended up being the ghost of the girl. So, question one, what does the young man find out about the girl? Question two, what detail at the end of the story is hard to explain? So, what happened at the end of the story? Think about his jacket. So, what happened that is hard to explain? And then, number three, what clues in the story hint at the surprise ending? There's a few clues that hint towards the surprise ending. What are those clues? Nice job. Check back tomorrow, and we will be doing more on The Stranger.